Now, using Inglourious Basterds as an example, give us an insight into that director-editor relationship. How did you work with Quentin? Did you argue? Did you debate? How were those decisions made?
We never argue. It's kind of amazing. I mean, we might like dig our heels in and get a little pissy every once in a while, which everybody does. But generally, we never argue. But we do debate. And it's really wonderful because it's it's all to make the best film possible. That's what it's all about. And we really leave our egos at the door. And we experiment and try a lot of different things. It's amazing. It's an amazing collaboration, too. And I'm very fortunate, seriously, to work with him. I just think he has a remarkable voice. And a remarkable voice. And because of that, he's just thrilling to work with. And what we do, and we experiment a lot. Not necessarily with the placement of scenes, but with how we interpret scenes. And it's really fun. Although he always has a very, very solid idea of what he wants to do with scenes. So that makes it easier, too, because he knows so much what he wants. And I actually understand the rhythms that he's trying to set forth in his scenes. So we're able to get to that place where we can experiment or leave it out at how it is. It's really wonderful.
I think it's pretty cool that you both have that understanding and bond when you work together. And I don't think a person needs to look any farther than the Inglourious Basterds DVD, where there's this fantastic little special feature, which I'm sure you're aware of, called the High Sallies. Now, what's the story behind this?
I think it started on Kill Bill.
Yeah.
It may have started earlier, can't remember. But what happened is that because I had a little kid, I had 2 little kids on Kill Bill, I couldn't go on location. So Quentin would go, "Would you please say hi to my lonely editor in L.A.?" And then it just started this whole thing.
Well, that's very sweet of him and the rest of the crew. Now, moving on, you've worked with some of the great directors of our time, from Oliver Stone to Lee Tamahori to Quentin Tarantino, of course. Now, how do you as an editor adjust to their individual styles of storytelling?
Well, that is the job of an editor, is to be able to adjust to the needs of the director. And really, simply put, that's what it is. We have to be able to do that. We have to be able to listen to them and then help them and maybe, mold a little bit. So that's a really, really big and important part of being an editor is being able to listen to their wishes and their style.
All right, now, of all the films that you've been involved with, which was the toughest to edit and why?
I actually think, I can say every single film had a challenge here and there, a corner that we had to get out of, a idea that maybe wasn't quite, not thought out, but an idea that somehow didn't fit into the whole picture. But I would say that the most challenging overall are actually the documentaries, because you have a lot of footage about whatever it may be, and then you have to mold it into a story that's compelling. So you don't have a script beforehand. Those are the most challenging, and they're a lot of fun.
Cool. Now, looking back at your career, Sally, from when you first began to where you are right now, what's one of the biggest lessons that you've learned in your career as an editor? A lesson that you'd pass on to any other aspiring editor?
Yeah, mainly towards aspiring editors. I feel at the beginning of your career, and I've said this many times, unfortunately, so people might have heard it over and over again from me. But, at the beginning of your career, I think you have to keep your overhead low, because keeping your overhead low, and it's kind of a weird thing because some people live really outside of their means, but I did Reservoir Dogs for $300 a week. If I had a huge mortgage, I would have never been able to even tape the film. And it started my whole career. So for me, When I talk to college students and whatnot, I just say, you know, don't feel compelled to take, you know, the biggest salary, or and don't and keep your overhead low so that you can take the jobs that are most interesting, because a lot of times they are the low budget film.
The Green Room will be right back after this short message. The Green Room is dedicated to sharing the wealth of knowledge from a broad selection of practicing industry professionals, with interviews from directors, writers, producers, actors and more added weekly. You'll always have a reason to keep coming back to the Green Room.
These days, there are a lot of easy-to-use editing programs out there. What are your thoughts when it comes to filmmakers taking on that editing responsibility and doing it themselves?
Oh, I think it's fun. You know, there's a lot of, I mean, look at Robert Rodriguez. Good grief, he's a fantastic editor, you know, and he cuts his own movies. So that's good. And, you know, sometimes you need a person to give another perspective, but sometimes you don't, and it really depends on the director.
All right, fair enough. Well, I guess then progressing from that point, what advice would you give to any director when it comes to working with their editor?
Be patient on the first edit, or the first cut of the film, because, you know, the first cut of the film is just always terrible, because it's not their vision, it's the editor's vision for the most part. And so they really, and I've been okay with that, like Quentin and I, you know, are used to each other, so there's no problem. But I've heard so many editors' horror stories about having put a cut together, and the director wants to project it, or the studio wants to project it, and it's their first cut, so of course it doesn't include, you know, their ideas. So, you know, there's no mind reading involved in here. It has to be a collaboration where everybody works together to get the best film.
Now, just on your point of film being a collaboration, how does it work in a much larger sense when you're working on a big budget studio pick and you've got all these different people to please and to make happy? How does it work? How do all the different parties come together to make that work?
Well, it is in fact a very difficult process, because there's many times there's a lot of people involved. I've been really lucky with Quentin, because it's just me and Quentin and Harvey and a couple of outside people, but generally we're all on the same page. But when you know, take a filmmaker and go into a big studio, there's always a lot of considerations, you know. How big the budget is. If you're working on a $160 million film, all of a sudden they have to make $300 million just to break even. And, you know, then you have to think about the rating of the film, so you have to be careful about what you include and don't include. And then there's the marketing, you know. All of a sudden they want it to be a little bit more of a love story. So you have to actually kind of be really flexible. And you have to be able to work with everybody so that they get the best film, you know, in terms of a big studio that they can. It's really important. It's really important to consider all the factors and realize that the studio actually has to make their money back.
Yeah, that's fair. And I also think it's good that you've brought attention to the business side of the film and what it needs to do financially. Now, moving on, what film do you personally admire the editing in?
Raging Bull. I can't get off it. I just think it's so brilliantly edited.
Cool. Okay, now, what do you see as the biggest, most common mistake that films make in terms of editing and crafting their story together?
I actually don't know. There is no one single mistake. You know, every film, every film has some kind of lump somewhere, and I don't think there is one. I really can't say that there's one common mistake.
Now, what's the best piece of advice you were ever given with regards to this industry?
You know, I read that, and I really never got any advice, which is funny. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say back about another question is, early on, you know, if you're going to be an editor, you have to decide how you're going to approach the job, because you know, I decided that I wanted to edit documentaries and then possibly move into features from there, because a lot of people decide they're going to do assistant work and then get to be an editor, but I only assisted once in my whole career. So on one television series. So that's also maybe a piece of advice, is just to decide how you're going to approach your working. Do you want to just work in a studio system? Do you want to work for independent people? Do you want, what kind of film do you want to chase?
Cool, that's a great bit of advice again, Sally. Now, if there was one thing that you could change about Hollywood, what would it be and why?
Actually, the budget, quite frankly. I think the budgets are getting too big.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that, of course, affects everybody's salary. But I think that the budgets are just too big. And I keep feeling like the days when, films cost less, it made it so that more risk could be taken. It's harder to take risks when you put so much money on the line.
It's actually a very interesting point you make there, Sally. Now we're actually down to our last question, which is, what does the future hold for Sally Menke?
I don't know. I'm going to be working with Quentin, I think, March of next year or something like that, July. I'm not sure when. And hopefully we'll be doing many more. Just got to keep working.
Well, that brings us to the end of our interview today, Sally. Thanks again for taking the time to chat with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Thank you.
And we all look forward to your next screen credit.
Me too. I can't wait, actually. Quentin just got back from Venice yesterday. So I can't wait to start hearing the news.
The Greenroom and its interviews are the property of M2E Proprietary Limited.